Alright, so let's talk inline editing. First, what is it, and then how does it work, and then how do we make it? First of all, inline editing is basically you have the grid, but some of the columns are actually editable. So what I mean is the cells themselves. So I can select the text in here, inline, and say, I am text right here, and then I can hit save, and it'll actually save that back. So if I refresh the page, you can see it saved that. This is also editable. I've got this column editable as well. So 5, right, save, and there we go. It's been saved. So that's what it is. It's very cool. It's very nice to be able to edit, and the edit function is smart. It will only save what you're touched. So if I touch this and say test, it's not going to save everything on screen and make a giant array. It's only going to save this row of data. It's going to save both of these, even though I didn't touch this one. It's really nice and quick to just save this one row. If I touch 2 rows, it'll save those 2 rows. Okay, so it's quick. It doesn't do a lot of DOM crawling because of that, and it's not a huge SQL update to do that as well. So it's very nice that way. So let's explain how to use the normal grid to set this up. This will only work in version 1.1 and up. Okay? So to do this, let's just go back here, and here's our standard grid call. So without it, here's what it looks like. Okay? Now, what we need to do is, in the original tutorial, I showed you how we were just throwing options in the attributes, and that's great for most cases. Inline editing is an advanced feature, so you're going to have to put some options up here in the grid. Okay, to do that, you have to first turn on inline editing. So you turn on inline editing is true. Okay, that's the first thing you have to do. The second thing you have to do is define which columns are editable. Okay, there's actually a lot you can do per column, so you can define those options here. Again, all this is optional only if you want to do inline editing. Okay, for standard grid use, you don't have to do any of this. So the second thing, I'm going to define column ops for options, and that's just going to be an object. Now, I list based on the call here what column I want. So I want discount code to be editable, right? So I'll do discount code, and then I'll say what are the options for discount code. Okay, so I'm saying here's my column options. Let's start with discount code. What options do I have? Well, I'm going to turn editable on by saying inline. Okay, there's going to be other kinds of editableness. Right now there's just inline in version 1.1. Okay, so I've said discount code is editable. There you go. Let's say we want to set this column n items editable. We would just comma as in a new column and say n items colon, okay, and we would say options editable inline. Okay, so there you go. Now we've made 2 columns inline editable, and I'll just save that and then go back here and ta-da, now it added the save button automatically and it made these editable. So how does exactly does all this work? So inline editing is pretty cool. What it does first is, it's going to set up inline. So this function inline editing gets called, somewhere. Set up inline editing. Where does this get called actually? Let's find that out. Let's see. Oh, that's right. It gets called up at the top. This is inside of the Ajax call after the rows have been added. If inline editing is set and the pager exists, okay, as of version 1.1 you can actually get rid of the pager. As long as both of those are true, then you can go ahead and set up inline editing. So setting up inline editing is pretty simple. It's going to add our save button. Okay, this is what happens when you save. I'll go over that in a second. But before that, what we have down here is, this is still in that same function, we're going to loop through our column options. So our column options are stored on the grid.data. Okay, so if you looked at the tutorials before, all of our options for the grid we're storing in grid.data, which is just an arbitrary object to store stuff in. So we're storing the column options there. So then we're just going to each through all the options. And then we're going to say, if I encounter an option that's editable and it's inline editable, that's when I'm going to start doing stuff here. So basically I've made some cool functions for get call and get TDs from TH, and those are just going to get all the TDs from a column. So back here, if I'm looping through the options and I get to the column discount code, I can easily, using that function, get all of the TDs, all of the all the TDs inside of that column. And that's good because I need to do something to each of those. That's why that's the case. Okay, so now that I've got all those TDs, I'm going to each through each TD. So now I'm looping through each TD in the column. All right, I'm going to cache the variable. Then basically I need to know the width. You can't just throw an input. So what this is an input text box, right? So if I inspect element, you can see this is an input right here. I can't just throw that in there willy-nilly. It has to inherit a lot. So not only is it the same width as the TD, but it's also inheriting all the properties of its parent TD. Okay, so I've got a lot of CSS set up to inherit all of the properties and set it to background, as well as give it a dotted outline. Okay, let's go back here. So we've extracted the width from the TD. We've given our TD a class editable cell, just so we can say that this cell is an editable cell. This also helps us get the cell later on. Then we're creating the input box, again putting the text from the TD inside of here. We're going to add a focus function and say, if you've touched it, we're going to add this class to be saved. And that's going to be really, really easy for us to go find this later when you're going to save. It's say, oh, just get the TDs, or just get the input boxes that say they need to be saved. Then we're going to replace the HTML, set the width, and that's all you have to do. And that will put in all those input boxes. So let's talk about saving. When you save, I want to send a JSON array to PHP to process. Okay? And that's the second step, is the index file, and I'll get to that in a second. So in order to do that, all right, the save basically, and let me check time. Okay. So basically, when you click save, okay, what happens is, first it's going to bring in, well, this is the save button already in. So when you hit save, okay, it's going to go find all those rows that need to be saved. See, that's why we stored that class. So now we know which rows need to be saved. Okay, and then we're going to basically form, what this does is it basically forms a real JSON string out of the variables. And what that string looks like is this right here. It literally has, you know, here's a column, colon, the value needs to be changed, comma, here's another item in the same row. All this is the same row. What row is it? Well, it's this key. This key is the parent to this row. And if you look at this for a second, this is the actual PHP array. That's how I came up with this. I started with the array that I wanted to have in PHP, and I looked at what it was in JSON when I decoded it, and I went off of that to create it properly. So this is the array that I want. I basically want an array of rows, each row being keyed by the primary key on that table. Okay, that's the key here, is that the primary key on the database table is the row ID. That way I know how to save it and to what table. And these are the column names. That's how it all works. So in order for this to work at all, a primary key needs to be set. So we're doing this on table orders. So on table orders, I have a primary key set right here. My primary key is ID. I don't care what it's called, I just need to know that it's there, and then I'll find it later in code. So this is the PHP array I want, and this is the JSON string that I need to create. Okay? So in doing so, I'm spending this function here creating that. So you can see I've got an array. I'm getting the column and the value from the text box, and I'm basically pushing each block. So let's go back to this for a second. I'm creating this right here. No, sorry. I'm creating this for each column that I need for each row, and I'm basically storing each of these in an array and then concatenating them all by a comma. And that means that I don't have to concat with a comma and then remove the comma at the end. If I just create an array and then join by comma, it does it for me. So I'm going to create a bunch of these, join them all by comma, wrap them in brackets, that's going to give me these, and I'm going to create many of these. So each of these are different rows. So I'm going to create one row of this and another row of this, and I'm going to concat those all by commas again. So that's what this does right here is, where are we at? So this creates each of those, and then it's going to concat them together right here. So MVP array join by comma. So that's joining each group by comma, putting it in brackets. And then after all that's said and done, we're going to put all that together here. Then we join all the rows together by comma, okay, and then add in the curly braces again. And the reason that those arrays have the right key is because is because I've set the row ID right here, row ID, to that internal part of Comet. I know it's complicated, you don't ever have to worry about it, but if you're curious how this works, that's how this works. Okay? Now, you're thinking, how'd you get the primary key? Well, good question. Let's go to the index file and see what the Ajax file and see what you have to change. So without doing saving, all you have is that. That's without doing saving. With having saving, you actually have to add this. Again, it's not a lot. This is not a lot of code to be able to save to the database. I think it's pretty nice. So all you have to do is first check for the save flag. Okay, I can't just accept it willy-nilly. You have to know that it's saved flag. And where that is in the script here, when I actually do the post, you can see I'm just sending save as 1, and I'm sending the JSON as the JSON post. That's the key. So once I go back to the Ajax file, I say, okay, I'm saving, so instead of calling grid load, I'm just going to call grid save. And let's go ahead and take a look at what grid save is. I know I'm getting late here. I won't keep you. Grid save. First, it's going to get the array to save. And the reason I have this function here is all it does is decode the JSON and make it usable as a... It basically takes the string, it takes this string, and turns it back into the PHP array. That's what it does, and the reason I have this as a separate function is so if you don't want to use my save function, you can make your own. You can just call this getSave array, and now you've got an array to work with that's really easy to work with to save it however you want to save it. So that's why that is. So I'm getting the save array. Now I'm calling getPrimaryKey. Okay, let's see how that works down here. So if I go down here and do getPrimaryKey, it uses a cool SQL function called showKeys from the current table I have set where key name equals primary. This will give me the primary key, and then I just parse out that array to get the primary key. So just to show you, if I copy this and run this query here like that and say the table that I want is orders, and I run that, here's what I get. So I can see table orders, this is my primary key, there's my column name right there. That's how I get the primary key. Okay, that's how all that works. So then I just return that primary key. So back up, just to finish this off. First I'm going to die if you don't have a primary key, because it doesn't work if you don't have a primary key. I can't know where to save the data if I don't know what row to save it to, right? So all I'm going to do is loop through that data really simply, make sure the data is safe, create an update statement. I'm going to create MySQL update statements. It's going to run the query and just update each row as it comes in, and if anything fails, it's going to die and give me the error back, so it's all checked. So what happens if you don't have a primary key and you're trying to do editing? Well, if I go to structure here and I delete the auto increment and then I delete the key, right, delete. So if I go back to the grid here and I try to edit, let's say I edit this and I try to save, it goes, oh, error, primary key for order is not set. So the grid is really going to help you make sure you do it right when you do editing, because you can't do it without the primary key. But the key, a cool thing about doing this is that the primary key, when you do have it set, is now on every row. So you can use that when you use this grid.